We're going to be talking today about how to build out an internal network, how some of our panelists have done it, and the lessons they have learned along the way. We'll talk about some of the challenges. We'll probably touch on mobile and remote delivery as well. And maybe with your help, we will have some conversation back and forth and actually have your questions come up to the panelists as soon as the sound comes back. There we go. Excellent. And we want this to be a conversation, not just us talking and you guys listening. So if you have questions along the way, please raise your hand and state the question, and we'll repeat it and then try to answer it best we can. So my name's Chris Knowlton. I'm with Wowza Media Systems. I'll be moderating the panel. We have 4 guests who are very good at what they do in enterprise streaming, and I'd like them to introduce themselves.
I'm Wayne Waterman. With Intel Corporation, I've been doing streaming since Enron Broadband Services way back in the day. Have built and iterated most of the streaming infrastructures at Intel over the last 14, 15 years.
I'm Scott Cezurek. I'm online video specialist at CME Group, which is the world's leading futures and options exchange, the parent company of the New York Mercantile Exchange, Chicago Board of Trade, et cetera. I've been doing streaming media since 2004. And at this point, we are a heavily regulated global company, so there's a lot of uniqueness in our setup based on that.
I'm Brian Walls with NASA. I'm part of the NASA Imagery Experts Program, which is the group that manages the infrastructure for NASA TV. We do 3 channels to satellite. And we also coordinate the imagery around the agency with standards, best practices, coordinating how to communicate between each other. And that covers broadcast video, streaming video, as well as still imagery.
And I'm Patty Perkins from Wells Fargo, and for 10 years we've been delivering video on demand, and so it's kind of neat that live streaming is sort of a new thing for us, and we just got Enterprise Unlimited live streaming agreed to be funded, and I'm so excited about that because I was able to show a $4 million save in travel on our live events just for this year. And so they kind of sat up and said, oh, maybe we ought to be streaming. Yay! So we've been at it for a really long time, but to get started with streaming, and I'll be talking about our live events and CEO town halls that we do.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Well, let's find out a little bit about the audience, just because we'd like to know who we're having a conversation with. So by show of hands, how many of you have not yet deployed a streaming solution at your company? All right.
We got to get that guy fixed up.
Okay. How many of you are looking to either refine or expand the streaming solution you have? All right. There's our majority. And then how many of you have a streaming solution but are thinking you might just replace it wholesale with something new? All right, just a few hands there. Okay, very good. So it sounds like most of you are looking on how to improve. So we'll touch on that perhaps as we go. And you guys can tell a little bit about what you're planning on for improvements and what suggestions you might have. Well, first then let's have you guys, so that our attendees know a little bit more about where you're coming from. Tell us a little bit about the streaming media usage scenarios that you have in your company, the ones that you're responsible for, and to whatever extent you can, whether or not it's part of a holistic, broader strategy or if you're sort of an island unto yourself.
So our streaming the last couple of years models a lot what you see in the internet as the number of video live streams is making a very, very sharp curve up. We've been running the last couple of weeks 4 or 5 webcasts a day. Most of those webcasts are under 1,000 people, but since Intel, we have a TAM of about 100,000. A couple of times a year, I'll do 30,000 people all at once. And as those in the industry know with live, most of those people show up in the last 2 minutes. Multicast is the only way that I can really reliably and effectively deliver to that many people all at once. And so you will hear me use the word multicast a lot.
Yeah, so at this point at our company, we deployed, we've been doing streaming media internally since about 2004. And at that point, our company was based exclusively in Chicago, basically one office. So we were delivering live streams pretty much to people who couldn't get up from their desks. I think at that time the company had only somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 employees. So over the past several years, as the company's grown, we now have satellite offices in Hong Kong, Singapore. We have partnerships in Brazil and Korea. And at this point, much like Patty was saying, our streaming media solutions became not only a cost savings factor in terms of travel, but also it was literally impossible to get executives or managers to all the places they needed to be to communicate with their employees. So we grew initially out of a broadcast unit. All the broadcast media that would happen from the trading floors out in Chicago was managed by our department. So as we grew into streaming media, a large part of that was built on the backbone of what we knew from broadcast. So we have a system that's very much built outside of that. But at this point, for things like, let's say, all-employee meetings or something like that, I would say that 95% of the employees at the company do not attend those in person and are watching those at their desktops globally.
And when you talk about the cost savings from travel, one thing that people usually don't include in that is the cost savings from employee productivity, getting up from their desk, walking to the auditorium, sitting in the auditorium, getting up, walking back, talking to people on the way, and then getting back to their desk. The time it takes for people to go see a live event versus watching it on their desktop is not insignificant.
Yeah, and I mean, on that same note, in terms of the migration from a live event to an on-demand event, I think many of you probably find that that is almost a seamless, whatever solution you're using at this point, it's fairly quick to get things into an on-demand environment. So there's also the element of people participating live in a virtual sense is something that happens quite often at our company at this point.
Okay. Brian?
So before I took the position where I am now, in sort of an agency coordination position, I was working in our office of the CIO at Marshall Space Flight Center, which is in Huntsville, Alabama. That's where I live. And there I engineered the current system that I'm going to talk a little bit about later, which is a heavily multicast focused system. I'm a fan of multicast. Around the whole agency, we have 10 different centers, and it's been very idiosyncratic, especially for internal streaming. There are all kinds of different solutions. So right now, there's a great deal of different things, some very old stuff out there, trying to move everything toward being a multicast basis where we can share content.
And if you'll step into the Wayback Machine with me just a little bit and take you back to the time that Wells Fargo merged with Wachovia, I was in the Wachovia arena, and we had a very video-centric culture there. We have the second largest satellite network next to Walmart. And all of our branches, large campus locations, we have more than 12,000 screens and 6,600 receive locations. And so our culture was very video-centric, and our leaders used video a lot and did live broadcasts, and they would go and watch them live and call in and ask questions. And so that strategy has evolved over the years until now with merging with Wells Fargo and beginning to take the road trips that John Stumpf is wonderful in front of an audience. And so to be able to bring that experience of our CEO in front of 800 people in an auditorium out to the entire 260,000 employees is pretty exciting. And so that strategy has kind of moved into now really focusing on those big live events, or scaling down a live event that would have a venue very similar to this, taking that into the studio so that you didn't have hotel and venue and all that. So you've got a location save plus a production save because you're spending a lot less money by having the leaders in the studio and then streaming that out to everybody. We also continue to use the satellite. So that's sort of how our strategy is changing as our the company has merged and we've gotten so large. How do you reach out and do all of that, and this, we really started to look at it in terms of content and who needs to see it.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like we have sort of overall, it sounds like you have coordination across the company. It sounds like you also do, Scott. Brian, it sounds like you're focused more on Marshall Space Flight Center, but coordinating with the other groups as well?
At this point, I'm working with coordinating, but there's no central authority saying this is how things will be done right now.
All right.
You should get louder.
How many here, out of curiosity, have within your organization a central plan for streaming, a holistic plan that covers the whole organization? Okay, it looks like we have about 10 hands up. And the rest of you, I'm going to say, let's confirm. How many of you do not have a holistic plan across your organization? All right, about twice as
Some
many.
of the same people?
Yeah, how does that work? Yeah, I know I've certainly heard of lots of folks where it's departmental, and then eventually the folks doing it in each department get together and start talking to each other and realize, oh, we could really be smarter about this and do it across the company, but it often takes a while to get there. So.
And you have to actually pay a lot of attention even if you do have a holistic solution, because other people in the organization may not know about it or like somebody, and they'll go try to create another solution independent of yours. And you have to listen to everybody to find out who's doing that and either stop them or incorporate them.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd add in addition to that, I'd be curious to know how many people here are in IT departments. Okay.
I came from SMG, I'm sales.
It's like about half.
And the rest of communications, is anyone in more communications?
Production.
Okay. So in our company, for example, I think the biggest challenge for us in initially getting off the ground, it wasn't, even after we knew that we needed a holistic solution across the organization, it was the idea of how do we get an IT division that already has a network system in place to adopt a massive amount of bandwidth, a massive number of additional servers on the network. So I think that's another challenge that was massive for us, trying to go to IT and say, this is a lot.
Yeah, I've heard that repeatedly. The biggest challenge that somebody has getting started with video is often going to the IT department and getting them to say, yes, you can stream all that stuff across my network and risk our business traffic.
Well, I'll just at the risk of jumping ahead a little bit, that really it's got to be a partnership. And I will tell you that at Wachovia, I didn't choose the solution. The network architect did.
Okay. Well, that's got to help then. You had that buy-in. Okay.
He was there in the meeting, and they all kind of sort of forgot we were there. It was pretty cool.
Well, let's talk about, at a high level, maybe you guys can give us an overview of some of the scenarios you work on. And I know you've sent in some slides, so shall we start with yours, Wayne?
Sure. The eye chart or the smaller one?
I'm going to go with the smaller one. You should have seen the first version he sent me. I imagine the folks in the back can't read this as it was, but the last one was 4 times more dense.
But it had more detail.
So you'll have to walk them through it.
You'll notice at the very top, 2 encoders, one inside our network, one outside our network, because we do initiate streams both internally and externally, and we have to pull it in and send it out. That encode goes to 2 media servers plus backup. One is multicast streaming, and that will serve 96+% of everybody at Intel, including the Wi-Fi networks. Pretty much the only place we restricted is in labs and fabs, where sometimes bad network can do bad things. The other is for adaptive streaming. We use most of the different flavors there. There is an origin server that sends it to all of the edge servers. The edge servers are placed primarily near the VPN gateways that we have, because I don't want to carry that sort of traffic across the WAN for the VPN users. But VPN is one of the primary usage for unicast at our company. You'll notice in the very bottom right-hand side is the non-streaming web services, because that really can be anything at this point. You need a place to host the player, authenticate the people, and track them, but that's not streaming, so I'm not all that interested. Right now, we do stream to the VPN users through the VPN gateways. There is, of course, the bandwidth constraint that happens there. There's encryption that happens at the VPN gateway, and that can cause some wiggly things. So my solution that was recommended by the VPN guys as I was trying to correct some of the problems is don't use the VPN. So for not using the VPN, we're going to send the stream outside to some external hosting, encrypted, of course. And then using VPN bifurcation, the VPN users will grab all of the Intel content through the VPN and the streaming content over the internet, decrypt and play. And that way I don't have VPN bottlenecks. We also have quite a few subsidiaries. McAfee, as you know, was purchased by Intel a couple of years ago, and just recently, just now, we are actually making them part of Intel, i.e. we've opened up the network of McAfee to the network of Intel, and there is an entirely different streaming infrastructure there that I either have to supplant or integrate with. But for the subsidiary companies, we're also going to send encrypted over the internet.
Okay, thanks for that.
Oh, and the other thing, looking at it, light blue is a virtual machine, gray is a physical machine. There are benefits to both.
Okay, maybe we'll get more into that. You had another slide too, is that right?
I do, and that's basically just where, if you see the location circles, e.g. IR, that's the different locations that we have data centers where we have streaming servers.
Okay. And if it's okay to share, then I'll have these get posted up on the website so folks can see them later?
I have that cleared through the legal, so
Okay.
yeah, that's fine.
So we'll put these on the website afterwards. You can go into the agenda where you see the entry for A101, and you'll be able to download the slides from there. Because I know some of these will be a little bit hard to read, especially from the back of the room. Okay, Scott, why don't you tell us about yours?
So the diagram here is higher level, but if you notice on the upper left, the one thing that's really important to us is that the production elements at this point are mostly on the network. So rather than having, let's say, a centralized studio or something like that, we wanted to make sure that we could bring people in from as many of the global locations as possible. So in terms of what we're doing enterprise-wide on that ingestion point, we do have a broadcast studio, so we're able to route any of the broadcast cameras. We have a digital studio. But beyond that, we're also able to pull in, let's say, so we have a video conferencing network that obviously is in virtually every conference room across the company globally. We're able to pull in those cameras. We have mobile production units that can deliver via fiber, and then using the broadcast integration, we're also able to pull in remote locations via a fiber vendor that can send it into the broadcast studio. All of that goes into what I have listed here as a production switch, but can essentially be anything. But what we do at this point is, and this goes back to what I was saying about our initial integration with IT. At the point when we launched video at CME Group, although we have a global backbone for market data that literally extends across the world, that bandwidth really comes at a premium. And at the point when we started streaming, that was a premium that IT could not afford to give us at all. So what happens for us is we initially push out a single feed to a cloud transcoder, and at that point, we encode 4 RTMP feeds and 4 HLS feeds for mobile, which we're using at only various levels right now. And those are pushed back into, there's an IP security layer between that particular cloud and us. Once it gets inside, you'll see here that effectively, now, it's not that we have 4 of these, but what happens when the average desktop pulls up a piece of content is when the first desktop pulls it up via the IP security layer, it gets cached on the caching server, and then at that point, the caching server is able to deliver it back out to all of the desktops in that particular node. The way those nodes are actually deployed at this point is a lot more elaborate than it was when we initially launched, which was we basically had data centers in one central location, and we would be pushing globally from, let's say, a data center in Chicago. At this point, a lot like Wayne's second slide, we're deploying from these caching servers globally. But the one thing that's not in this drawing is the VPN issue. And for us, the VPN issue is most notable when it comes to mobile. So it is a big requirement on our part for the past, let's say 4 years. 4 years ago, I think the company was just migrating from BlackBerrys to iPhones. And at the moment we migrated to iPhones, it became an immediate requirement that we be able to deliver this content to iPhones. So much like Wayne's situation, what effectively happens there is rather than going through the caching servers or rather going through the VPN, they are pulling it from the public internet in some cases, they'll be authenticating through the VPN, or there will be some sort of application authentication on the mobile device that says, yes, you're allowed to go back and get the content. All of that is done still at just a basic IP security layer that we're deploying.
Okay. And you mentioned down at the bottom you have caching servers. Does that imply that most of the streaming is actually HLS? Or do you have repeaters or anything else for RTMP?
Okay, it's actually somewhat complicated. Yeah. So initially what we did is our initial deployment was actually we were virtually using flash servers as caching servers, in a sense. We had those set up in a way where there was effectively like sort of a repeating unicast stream from the public into the flash. This would be in like in a live scenario. And at that point, everyone internal would push back to the RTMP. But at this point, yeah, that's correct. Pretty much everything is going through HLS.
Okay, very good. All right, and I think that was your only slide, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about NASA.
They have better content.
So throughout NASA, we have a legacy of traditional broadcast video infrastructure that we've had for years. Every center has at least one TV studio or some kind of production capability there, sometimes more than that. And at Marshall, we do as well, and we had an old cable system that provided TVs in conference rooms, some common areas. So as we were with everybody with computers on their desks, they wanted to be able to see the video there as well. But we are in the same facility and using the same capabilities. So for our distribution, we're pulling in content from satellite. Not only do we include the things that we produce ourselves, but we're also providing local programming from the affiliates. We got a must carry, and it's on both cable and our streams. We have the capability to pull in content at high quality that we use for our NASA TV when we're going out. We also have that capability to bring content internally between the different centers. So mostly we bring it into a video switch, and from there we then go to the encode cycle where we are primarily delivering with multicast. So if you look at the top line there, we have multicast delivery that's available to anybody that's plugged into the network. So your desktop or your laptop, if it's plugged in or docked. And then we also have set-top boxes. So the newer TVs we're often supplying directly plugged into the Ethernet there. We have a parallel system that's delivering that we've implemented ourselves. It looks like the software that we're using for what we call desktop TV, but we call that the desktop TV Wi-Fi that we provide for anybody that's not attached to the wire. We don't support multicast across our Wi-Fi. So we use, when we're doing the encode, we're doing HD typically at 6 megabits per second. But the encoders that we're using can do a secondary channel that we're doing at 1 megabits per second. We use that as a unicast that we're putting through a Wowza server and playing out through JW Player specifically. So we have a website that looks like the Qos product that is doing the IPTV, the multicast delivery. And that also works for VPN because it's unicast, so people are able to get in. And that works pretty well for most people as long as they have a good connection. They can typically pull down a 1 meg stream fairly reliably. And we also still do cable distribution, have both analog and digital cable. It doesn't go everywhere. In some cases, those are still 4x3 CRTs that are sitting somewhere and aren't looking very good. But we still, well, certainly the digital cable still works very well with an HD TV, so we have those in certain places as well.
Now, do you transrate for those Wi-Fi people, or do you send them a 1 megabit stream?
We do send them the 1 megabit stream right now. I would love to be able to do adaptive, but we don't have the horsepower. And of course, we just got, now that Wowza's upgraded and throws that in, we may look at it and see if we have enough horsepower to do it on maybe at least 1 or 2 of our streams to do transrating.
Just be sure to have an Intel chip in there. It'll do it a lot better. Wowza supports QuickSync.
That's right. All right, Patty.
My slide is on purpose really simple because we had for 2 reasons. We kind of had to make it simple, and the other reason is I can't really tell you a lot about the infrastructure because we protect a lot of people's money, and so legal kind of says keep it real simple. So that's what I do. I mentioned earlier that we do have production studios. We have our main production studios in Charlotte. and we have another one in San Francisco, and then Wells Fargo Advisors has one in St. Louis. So I just chose to show you the example of our CEO town hall. This is our largest production value type program that we do. And it either comes back to our Broadcast Operations Center, our Technology Center in Charlotte, either by bank fiber, which is our preferred method in most of the ways that we do it, because a lot of these locations are bank-owned locations. If it's not, then we have a production truck, and then it comes back through Vivix. Comes back to the TOC. We use an elemental encoder, and we put out a high bandwidth stream and a low bandwidth, and you can see that high is not very high at 600 kilobits. But it works. I mean, it gives us the quality that we need. People really like it. It's not HD, but you know, people are pretty excited about seeing the CEO or seeing their leaders on their desktop, so it's pretty good. It goes through a complicated proxy process. That's one of the things that I'd have to kill you if I told you if I understood it anyway. Out through the internet to Collective. You may know them formerly as Contiki. We use the Contiki product, but the overall company brand now is Collective. They monitor with us. We monitor each live stream, as do they, just to be sure everything's good. Then it comes back to Wells Fargo, back again through the proxy switch out, and then it's in the, it does the secure peer-to-peer delivery. We use the client on the desktop. So that kind of takes us to two things. Because we're going back into the company intranet, our remote users are connected to the company intranet through VPN, but we don't use the split tunneling on the VPN because for us it's a security issue. We don't use it hardly at all. They were doing it for some printing, and then they just kind of decided they don't feel real comfortable about that either. So the split tunneling thing is, you know, we were eager to do it just to try to help out, but it's a security issue as far as our folks are concerned. Another area that's been mentioned is virtual machines. Again, you know, because it's a client and it's a software secure peer-to-peer delivery, we have sort of two scenarios with the virtual machines. We have one group that's using a Citrix wrapper to get to a lot of their applications, but they can cut and paste the URL to the link to the video out and put it into their browser and access the client and use it that way because they're using a real machine. Most of our overseas locations do have virtual machines, and so we have folks connected there with real machines, and they like to get together in the cafeteria and watch anyway. So our CEO just gave a shout out to our Bangalore and Hyderabad and our Tagua City in Philippines locations, and it's quite the celebration. They were just all high-fiving each other and jumping up and down. It's quite a moment. So to be able to pull the company together and do this, there are kind of ways around, but our next challenge to the vendor is how we're going to do virtual. Because, you know, the enterprise is moving that way. If you're going to be an enterprise service, then you need to take into account all of our security issues and our control issues.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So we've touched on a little bit, but I'm going to come back to this. As you know, as the enterprise, as media has continued to evolve and we've started moving towards adaptive bitrate streaming and the like, you know, a lot of folks are coming from real media or Windows media or, you know, other older formats. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're evolving and how within your company from older formats to newer formats and what's on the horizon?
I'll start because it's the shortest answer is we're really not. We're still delivering a Windows media stream because we're using the same technology that we use for video on demand. It's the same thing, it's just a progressive download, and live has a little bit more urgency about it. But it's the same thing, and so we're delivering the same thing. When we get to mobile, we'll start thinking about transcoding and everything, but for us, it really hasn't changed, and it was a really convenient, cost-effective way to roll out live streaming because we're using the same platform. We didn't have to do anything new.
Nice.
Well, we do have a NASA standard for streaming that calls out that at a minimum when you're doing any kind of both streaming and VOD, that you will have an H.264 version and that it will be captioned and that we'll be moving toward HTML5, that's the goal on where we're headed. So we still have people that are using Windows Media, even a couple that are using some real technologies, but everybody has on their roadmap moving toward some of what I've just said. also, and I'm trying to push toward being able to share between the different systems, because I covered, I had the brand names. Other centers aren't necessarily using the same vendors, not exactly the same architecture, but trying to move everybody toward being able to handle transport stream delivery through multicast. And we've licensed the JW Player as currently a solution that's available to everybody as long as they're using nasa.gov. So that's something that everybody can aim toward as well. So that's where we're headed.
Cool.
Yeah, on our side, our first enterprise deployment when we were a much smaller company was Windows Media based. And that was a situation where we deployed all of that internally. It was all being distributed from within the network. There was no cloud element, there was no cloud transcoding, there was no barrier between public IP. If I had an unlimited amount of money to launch a solution today, an unlimited buy-in from IT, we would be doing the exact same thing, just with newer streaming formats. However, it is very, very pricey making a change as big as the change that at this point, in a lot of cases with Windows Media, at our company, for example, we're very up to date on OSs. OSs get retired. We can no longer run old OSs. We have issues with some legacy content where there's no way for anybody on an existing approved desktop to view that particular streaming format. And we never wanted to be in that situation again. So part of that is part of what leads into us using a cloud solution and going through the trouble of trying to get that as secured as we possibly can, or not as we possibly can, as precisely as secure as our regulators require it to be. Because when those changes come, we don't want to be the ones who have to redeploy servers. And quite frankly, I don't want to be the one who has to, I'm not in IT, I don't want to be the person who has to go to IT and say that for the next 6 months I need virtually a full-time resource to go into these servers and change all these settings. So for us on the enterprise layer, it's easier for us to adapt because what I'm referring to as the caching servers, which are also effectively edge servers. Those are robust enough that they can handle when we make a transition to a new format. And that is not as difficult as deploying an entirely new set of servers or streaming formats. So there are still things we're looking forward to doing in the future. And like I said, were we able to do an entire enterprise architecture all within the network, that would be something we'd love to do. But resource-wise, that's incredibly intensive, and making changes is complicated. So at this point, we're streaming H.264. And hopefully, if we need to switch to something else, if MPEG-Dash becomes the new standard, it will be fairly easy for us to do that by negotiating with our cloud transcoders and not actually deploying it or reconfiguring a set of internal servers.
Nice. Okay. So using the power of the cloud to sort of help future-proof, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So right about the same time that we transitioned away from Windows Media for everything was about the same time that IT started to implement the bring your own device, bring your own computer. It had to be compliant, but we had Macs in the environment. We had Linux machines in the environment, and there are a lot of these that won't play Windows Media. So right about the same time we moved away from Windows Media to H.264, we were also introducing all of these new devices. About the same time, we were also introducing an internal self-serve virtualization platform. So I could spin up a VM in this data center or this data center. It was really kind of neat because, as he said, going and changing configurations on many, many, many servers is difficult. I know because I'm one of the guys who has to do it. I'm also IT. But I was able to spin up a brand new media server infrastructure across the entire company in a little under a month by myself. And then later on, I was able to say the 46-some physical servers that we have out there with Windows Media, yeah, you can just unplug them, toss them out back, set them on fire. It was really good for my review when I said, I have taken away these tens of machines, and now they're VMs, and if we don't want them anymore, we terminate the instance, and we're good. Multicast is still my biggest fear. June is really starting to scare me. With the MP API support going away from Chrome, Silverlight goes away, Java goes away, VLC goes away. and that's going to make multicast kind of a troublesome thing.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that is a pain point for a lot of folks.
It's going to get a lot more painful real soon.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, if any of you have any bright ideas about that, please speak up, and remember to be asking questions if you have questions. But in the meantime, several of you have mentioned working with different vendors, and of course you obviously have locations all over the place. How are you keeping track to make sure that your streams are actually delivering or arriving where they need to arrive, and understanding what the quality looks like across? How are you doing all the monitoring and everything?
QoS, player metrics is something that is very, very hard to do with multicast, because of course your client isn't talking to your server.
Right.
So we have a brilliant network team that does monitoring and looks at things. So far as the unicast, we find out when people have problems because they write a question that says, hey, it doesn't work. Or I have video but no audio, and we say unmute. But
That's right. I'll add best practice. Town halls, make sure all the questions route to you before they route to the CEO.
But yeah, that's where most of the knowledge that we get about something going wrong with the stream comes from, is the end user
okay.
telling us about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, a lot of that monitoring is done on internet traffic constantly by the network team that is managing the caching and edge servers. So on the occasions where there's an interruption that's specific to video, they know about it before, in many cases, they know about it before the viewer knows about it. So, I mean, on the other hand, we do have instances where, an individual user is having an interruption and we track it just through plain old feedback. But I mean, generally speaking, because we're using the same servers that are being used to serve up the internet, the diagnostic tools are constantly in use by our networking team anyway.
Okay.
Unfortunately for our internal streaming, it is mostly a trouble ticket issue. If somebody has a problem, they call in a ticket and it goes through our normal IT path and gets to the right people. We do have network folks that are good and understand what's going on, because sometimes you'll see a router will lose its brain or get reset so that it isn't routing multicast anymore, and so you'll get several tickets in and they'll chase it down pretty quickly. But once upon a time, our cable system, we used to have somebody that sat at a control center and had every channel up, and that's all gone away cost-wise. We'd like to at least have a multi-viewer up that could show most of our screens, but we don't even have that right now.
Yeah, I want a video knock again too.
I'll just add two more things to that. The first one is the QoS issue is a big one for us. We've just been moved into a category that has had some significant impact, and we're seeing a lot more buffering. And our users are sophisticated enough to know about buffering, and the way I find that out again is through the survey. They tell us. And so we're working with our partners to figure out, and with our internal partners to figure out how we're going to accomplish that. The second thing is that our monitoring really only goes down internally to the switch level. So we can only tell where the congestion is at a switch level. We can't really get to the desktop. And so our vendor is releasing a new product that will help us monitor more closely to the desktop level and know within that arena, sort of, or that local area network, what's going on. So we're real excited about that because, again, if we can do more monitoring right now, if we need to monitor a specific location, I have to put in an SR and and give them the location and blah blah blah. Well, you don't know. It's like the ocean tide. It just moves around all the time. And so how do you manage that? And so if we can get some better monitoring tools from the vendor, and we can manage it ourselves a little bit better and have an idea of what's happening.
Peer-to-peer lets you know a lot more about individual.
Yeah, it's pretty huge.
So you mentioned buffering issues, and you mentioned, I think you mentioned bring your own device is when you started switching over. And so as people come into the enterprise and they've gotten used to being at home and watching HD video now, it's pretty commonplace. How is that impacting what you guys do? I mean, it sounds like, Patty, going back to what you were saying, you're okay with sort of the standard def approach for now, but do you see on the horizon, or do any of you see
Well,
was HD and pushing you?
As far as the user expectation, we're really, for us, the demand is really more around the user interface and being able to interact with their videos. And so we're happy that we've been able to release a portal experience. So it's a browser experience, and I can customize my channels, and I can do all that stuff and manage my videos. Like I said, we get really good reports. I mean, they're just tickled to death. It's like, it's in my computer. The younger folks that come in, they expect, well, I'd want to upload a video somewhere or anything. We're looking at that, but right now we're satisfied with the experience.
I mean, for my part, as someone who's been working with video since just before YouTube, I think the term HD is something that drives me crazy more than any other term.
I wasn't going to go there, but let's go there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think.
Send in an HD file.
Yeah. So our vendor, right? HD is 2 megs. HD is 2 megs. It's a 2 meg H.264. What does that mean?
720p?
Maybe.
Yes, maybe, right? Well, what's your playback device, right? I mean, that's the other question. I mean, so what you mean by HD, not you in particular, Chris, but what anyone means when they say HD is something that is pretty complicated. I think, we can deliver up a 2 meg feed to someone. Generally, the video that they're seeing, if we have really in-depth content, we're probably going to use a different codec, or we're going to use some kind of rich media wrapper around it if we have like really in-depth content. Generally, what they're looking at is a person. And in many cases, if you have properly set up your H.264 encoding settings, you're going to look virtually as good on a standard, or like even a 17-inch computer screen at 700K as you're going to look at 2 megs or 6 megs. Yeah. On the other hand, so this kind of gets into like adaptive bitrate best practices, which is that you want to offer up an HD feed, however you define HD. You want to have this very top quality one, so that someone can full screen it and it's not going to only show up this big or something like that. At the same time, at least in our case, when at least the first viewer is going out to the public internet to pull that in and it's coming in on a caching server, you don't necessarily want to be delivering an HD version to everyone in the enterprise, especially because that HD feed can be delivered to them unbeknownst to them, whether they want it or not. So I think, so we do encode virtual HD, and expectations on the viewer side is always set by things like YouTube and Netflix. I'm sure everyone's experienced someone in their organization saying, I don't have these problems with Netflix, or I don't have these problems with YouTube. But I think at the same time, there really is this balance of, yes, people may complain if they full screen it on their the one giant monitor on the wall that they have that they're normally using to monitor network traffic, and they decide to pull up this giant video for once. But I think you have to balance that out with the load that it puts on the network. And in my personal opinion, at least for the majority of corporate content, it's like far from necessary.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that I don't need to see at HD. Where I run across it is, actually, you had a question.
Oh, yeah. After
Okay. So with the bring your own device, a lot of Mac users come. And I have a very relatively small but very, very loud contingent of people who say, I don't want to install Flash on my machine. I don't want to install Silverlight on my machine. I just want it to play out of Safari. Good, we do HLS and stuff. But people seem to have the idea that the corporate network, the enterprise network, is the same thing as the internet. And it's not. We're never going to be able to convince people that it's a different beast. But most of the complaints that come around, I want HD, is I can get HD at home and it works great. Yes, but when you're at home on VPN, think about all those other people pulling 2 megabit streams through this very small pipe, and you will not have a good experience. You will have an HD frame, not an HD video. But yeah.
All right.
We actually typically do deliver, we deliver 6 meg streams for the multicast. So if you're willing to plug into a wire, you're getting a pretty good picture on pretty much any monitor you have. And in our case, because it's not exactly the internet.
Nope.
It's a better experience typically
You can't
than if they're
do
going.
multicast
They
on the
can go to
internet.
YouTube, but the YouTube is all going through virus scans and stuff. So we give a better picture.
Your
at
stream is
speed.
better. Nice.
all right. So there was a question? Go ahead.
My name is Albert and I'm from Ustream. I have spent my past 5 years building something that you guys did just for public, for the internet and for internal users as well. So my point here is not unbiased. First of all, great panel, so thank you very much for your thoughts. It's really great to hear that. My question would be that to you, would you suggest to someone who tries to replace an old solution or just enters this area to build what you did or to enter that, would you suggest to become a video expert? Because this is not straightforward. So like multicast and gateways and transcoding and iOS and Android and all the browsers, and so this is not straightforward. I can tell I have done this for many years. And also I'm the inventor of the SDC, the software-defined content over network. So we have a solution for the multicast problem, what you mentioned. And I think that's the future. So I have actually two questions. So what do you think, should someone start right now to build something out on their own and take all the responsibility? Or maybe look for something which is already done. And second is, how are you going to replace the multicast? And what area was that? Thanks.
So I think the two questions I heard there were if you were recommending to someone who's just getting started, what would you tell them to do, basically? And second, how will we solve the multicast? And you were describing how video is really hard. And Brian, I have to do this. You might say that it takes a rocket scientist to figure out video, based on what you were saying. So
Finally, rocket science.
I was hoping that happened.
So the two questions, I guess, are what would you recommend to someone who's just getting started or wholesale replacing their system? And
So if you were
multicast?
starting from zero, I would suggest one of two things. Either one or two really anorak freak streaming guys who do this for fun on the weekends because they like it, or consultants, because this isn't easy. It is quite complex. It does go quite deep. There are people out there, such as myself and my colleague Wayne Lenaweaver, who we love this stuff. We would do it if you didn't pay us. Wait, don't record that. If you have that person in the enterprise, give him some resources. Give him some engineers that he can talk to. You don't even have to assign the engineers. Just give him some engineers that he can talk to. Give him some POC budget, and they will do a lot. Otherwise, bring somebody in who knows what they're talking about.
Okay. And what about multicast? Should we come back to that one, or do you want to touch on it?
I don't have any answers right
You're
now.
looking for an answer as well, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the question of what would you do if you were starting right now, there's one huge question behind that, which is what are your resources and what's the buy-in at your organization? In our case, we couldn't rely on there being a massive amount of buy-in in anywhere. Everyone was taxed. I mean, we're just hopefully getting out of a really bad recession. Yeah, I think the idea of it would be fantastic to have someone on the IT side, a really talented engineer who could go in and actually, even if you bring in a vendor, there's going to be a huge amount of deployment and integration with your existing network. I mean, if you can get IT, if you're in the highest dollar category, you can get IT to sign off on QoS and build an entirely new network. And if you do that, you can just go out to an enterprise vendor and build that. That costs an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think, so the solution we have in place, this one where we're essentially going out to a cloud, any cloud vendor at this point wants that enterprise business, and they're cognizant of the fact that there are security requirements with any enterprise client, and they're willing to accommodate most clients on those things, in many cases at not a huge additional cost. Provided you're willing to do something like IP level security, or as opposed to like single sign-on or something like that. But for us, we went into this initially thinking this is going to be a massive proof of concept to IT, and IT is going to see how much people are wanting to watch video. And once they know that the demand for video is there, they're going to put resources aside for it. Essentially, the position we're in now is we built something that works well enough at a low enough price point without those deployments internally that although it would be really nice to have for me it would be really nice to have all of that inside, I don't know that IT thinks it's worth all of the additional resources that would be involved in putting that in there. Right. So from our side, ours was a very good starter plan. It was a very good starter plan to be doing most of your work on something that doesn't live inside your network. And it turned out in the long run that it's also been a pretty sustainable solution for us. I mean, I don't think we'll stick with it forever, but it's been sustainable enough that unfortunately it's harder to get the resources to do the very expensive one. So
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be too successful.
yeah, I screwed up.
Well, so one thing that I would tell somebody is it depends a lot on your situation, because I think one thing is the size of your network. Like at Marshall, we've got about 7,000 computers behind a single firewall, so it's on a network we control. One of the best things that happened to me in building the system was we had a snow day. And so the weather was coming in, and everybody was going out to the local TV and pulling up the weather map. And it came very close to bringing down our whole network because, you know, it was completely blocking up the internet pipe. It was filling up routers. Whereas now we have our own weather channel. It's 6 meg on any pipe. You know, everybody's got a gig pipe. You don't even see that. Email completely swamps it. So once you're to a steady state with multicast, it's great. I'm a fan. It is hard to build up. And there's no question that the industry is moving a lot of things into the cloud, that's where the work's really happening, is being able to deliver through the cloud. So if you've got smallish offices around, I'd say, hey, look at going out to somebody. You know, consider buying the service, just encode out to that. Put whatever security you need on for the material, that's a good answer. But if you have larger networks, multicast is a really good way to move high quality video around. And well, I heard yesterday, I was here at some of the discussion there, 4K is gonna be hard to get through the net for most people for a long time.
Right.
But, you know, with multicast, it's 18 meg.
And not that I have an answer, but I have a clarification about multicast. When I say multicast, I mean IP multicast. I don't mean application layer multicast. I don't mean peer-to-peer multicast.
Absolutely.
That is not multicast.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Patty, do you have anything to add?
Just the only thing I would add is that multicast never worked for us. We just couldn't enable it, too many merged systems and all that, so we just abandoned it. And if to the other question, if you're hiring, right now, we had a discussion about this at Communication Media Managers Association last year. What are the skill sets to look for in your new hires? Video people that know video production and know how video works.
There are IT people out there, but the video people are different
They are.
in our own special way.
That's right, polish them and love them.
All right, well, we have just a few minutes left. We might have time for 1 or 2 questions. All right, I saw that hand go up first.
Thank you. Is anyone looking to use WebRTC as a
WebRTC?
WebRTC is very cool.
peer and delivery?
Are we looking into WebRTC and peering applications and such?
I mean,
I'm looking at it,
Yeah.
still
Same.
researching. It doesn't multicast. No, I mean, I wouldn't be using WebRTC for global transmission of stuff. I mean, it's very, very cool for peers to peers,
Yeah.
you know, multiple people working together, but not as a distribution platform. But it's very cool stuff.
I agree in the same sense, which is it's very cool, and it would
Yeah.
be very cool to deploy on like specific work groups or segmented areas. But yeah, for the organization, it would be a little rough.
And we're not looking at it right now.
Okay.
and we have the secure internal peer-to-peer, so
So you're all set there.
yeah,
Okay.
that's our bread and butter.
All right, one more question. Jimry.
Just specifically with VPN, split tunneling, it's always been an issue with different, with our network team as far as security. They always want to whitelist a small range of IPs. How do you convince the network security team, rightfully so, not limiting the CDN when you want your teleworkers to be all over the place? Have you ran into that scenario? Have you work something out with your network team?
So the way I
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. So how do you convince the VPN team to allow external streaming, split tunneling,
A broader range.
a broader range of split tunneling? So rather than saying, will you do this? I have an idea. Say, if I were going to be split tunneling, what is the security and network requirement for that stream? And that can usually be brought back to what is the classification of the data, what they're talking about. So for this classification, and you will find stuff about documents in your company policy, this is the requirements for this level of classification. If you can apply the policy to the video, the policy they use for documents to video, then that will tell you what you need to do in order to secure that content sufficiently for external delivery, distribution.
Yeah, one
Always encrypted, of course.
May the odds be always in your favor. Because it didn't work for me.
But show them what the classification is and what the policy around data classification is, and say, does this apply to video?
All right, well, we have reached the end of our time. Thank you all for joining us. If you have further questions, I'm sure the panelists will stay around for a few minutes.